The Macabre History of the Morrows, a hidden heiress adopted 14 children with no past. Autumn of 2003 brought with it whispers of a name that had been buried in the annals of American high society for over 3 decades. Evelyn Morrow, the forgotten daughter of the once powerful Morrow textile dynasty, had returned to claim her birthright, a crumbling Gothic mansion in the hills of upstate New York that had stood empty since her family's mysterious disappearance. In 1971, what made Evelyn's reappearance particularly unsettling was not just her 32-year absence from public life, but the 14 children she brought with her. These children, ranging in age from 5 to 16, possessed no birth certificates, no school records, no medical histories, and no identifiable connections to any families, institutions, or government databases. They existed in a legal and social vacuum that defied explanation in an age of comprehensive digital documentation and mandatory registration. The Morrow estate, known locally as Ravens Hollow Manor, had been the subject of local folklore and speculation for decades. Built in 1889 by railroad magnate Cornelius Morrow, the massive stone structure had housed 4 generations of one of America's wealthiest families until their sudden and unexplained disappearance. In 1971, the family had simply vanished one winter night, leaving behind their fortune, their belongings, and a mansion that local authorities had found disturbing in ways they could never adequately explain. Evelyn Morrow's return to claim her inheritance had been facilitated by a team of lawyers who specialized in estate recovery and genealogical research. They had spent years tracking down the surviving heir to the Morrow fortune, following paper trails through offshore accounts, foreign residences, and legal entities that had been established to preserve the family's wealth during their absence. But what the lawyers discovered when they finally located Evelyn raised more questions than it answered. She had been living under assumed names in various European countries, maintaining her anonymity through a complex network of financial arrangements that suggested sophisticated planning rather than simple exile. Her reappearance was not the desperate return of a lost heiress, but the calculated emergence of someone who had been deliberately hiding while preparing for this moment. The 14 children who accompanied Evelyn to Ravens Hollow Manor presented a puzzle that immediately attracted the attention of local social services and law enforcement. Child welfare investigators who arrived to conduct routine assessments found themselves confronting a situation that challenged every protocol and procedure they had been trained to follow. The children appeared physically healthy and were remarkably well-educated, demonstrating knowledge and capabilities that exceeded most conventionally raised children their age. They spoke multiple languages, displayed advanced mathematical and scientific understanding, and possessed cultural knowledge that suggested extensive travel and exposure to diverse educational experiences. But they also exhibited behavioral characteristics that immediately alarmed the investigators. They moved through the mansion with an eerie uniformity, responding to Evelyn's subtle signals and commands with a precision that suggested intensive conditioning. They showed no curiosity about their new environment, no excitement about exploring their brand new home, and no typical childhood behaviors that would indicate normal emotional and social development. Most disturbing was their complete inability to provide any information about their backgrounds, families, or experiences before arriving at the mansion. When questioned individually, each child gave essentially identical responses. They had always been with Mother Evelyn. They had lived in many places, and they understood that their previous life was not important compared to their purpose. At Ravens Hollow Manor, Dr. Patricia Williams, a child psychologist brought in to assess the children's mental state, found evidence of psychological conditioning so sophisticated that it appeared to have systematically erased their individual identities and personal histories. The children genuinely seemed to have no access to memories that predated their time with Evelyn, as if their personalities had been constructed rather than developed naturally. The investigation into Evelyn Morrow's background revealed a woman whose life had been deliberately obscured through layers of false identities, fabricated documents, and financial arrangements that made it virtually impossible to trace her activities during her 32-year absence from the United States. She possessed multiple passports, had maintained residences in at least 6 countries, and had been involved in business activities that remained deliberately vague despite extensive investigation. But perhaps most troubling was the discovery that Evelyn's return to claim the Morrow estate had been planned for years, possibly decades. Financial records showed that she had been systematically preparing for her reappearance, liquidating assets, terminating foreign business relationships, and arranging the complex logistics necessary to transport 14 undocumented children across international borders without triggering immigration or customs investigations. The children themselves provided few clues about their origins or Evelyn's methods for acquiring them. Medical examinations revealed that they came from diverse ethnic backgrounds and showed no genetic relationship to each other or to Evelyn. Their dental work, vaccination records, and other medical indicators suggested they had received high-quality healthcare throughout their lives, but from providers who had left no traceable records. Local law enforcement's investigation into the mansion itself revealed modifications that had been made during the Morrow family's absence, despite the property supposedly being vacant and secured. The interior had been systematically altered to accommodate large numbers of children, with dormitory-style sleeping arrangements, educational facilities, and recreational areas that suggested the building had been prepared for exactly the kind of occupation that Evelyn had brought to it. But most unsettling were the discoveries made in the mansion's extensive basement levels, which had been converted into what could only be described as a complete institutional facility. The basement contained medical examination rooms, psychological testing facilities, and what appeared to be isolation chambers, designed for behavioral modification or punishment. The walls of these basement rooms were covered with charts, graphs, and documentation that suggested systematic study of child development, psychological conditioning, and behavioral modification techniques. The materials revealed a level of expertise in child psychology and institutional management that went far beyond what would be expected from a simple wealthy eccentric dot. As investigators delved deeper into the basement facilities, they discovered evidence that the mansion had been used for similar purposes during the original Morrow family's residence. Historical records and architectural analysis revealed that the basement modifications dated back to the early 1900s, suggesting that the systematic acquisition and conditioning of children had been a Morrow family tradition spanning multiple generations. The discovery of these historical precedents transformed the investigation from a simple child welfare case into something approaching an archaeological excavation of a family's dark legacy. The Morrows, it appeared, had been involved in activities related to children for over a century, using their wealth and social position to conduct operations that had remained hidden from public scrutiny. Financial analysis revealed that the Morrow family fortune had been built not just on textile manufacturing and railroad investments, but on a complex network of charitable organizations, orphanages, and social service institutions that had provided them with access to vulnerable children throughout the early 20th century. These organizations had operated under the guise of philanthropy while serving purposes that remained deliberately obscured in the historical record. Evelyn's 14 children represented the latest iteration of whatever project the Morrow family had been conducting for generations. But unlike previous eras when such activities could be hidden through social isolation and limited government oversight, Evelyn's 2003 return occurred in an age of comprehensive documentation and federal investigation that made her family's secrets increasingly difficult to maintain. The children, meanwhile, adapted to life in the mansion with an ease that suggested they had been specifically prepared for this environment. They knew the layout of the building, understood the routines and expectations that Evelyn established, and seemed to view their residence at Raven's Hollow Manor not as a new experience, but as the fulfillment of a long-anticipated destiny. As winter approached and the investigation continued, it became clear that Evelyn Morrow had not simply returned to claim an inheritance, but had come back to complete some form of multi-generational project that the Morrow family had been conducting for over a century. The 14 children were not adoptees in any conventional sense, but participants in an ongoing experiment that treated childhood as raw material for purposes that remained terrifyingly unclear. The Gothic mansion that had stood empty for 32 years had been awakened to serve its original purpose once again, sheltering secrets that connected the present to a dark legacy stretching back through generations of American wealth and privilege. And at the center of it all was a woman who had spent 3 decades preparing to return home with children, who had no past and no identity beyond their role in the macabre history of the Morrow family. The federal investigation that followed the discovery of Evelyn Morrow's operation would ultimately expose a multi-generational conspiracy that had operated for over a century, using American wealth and social privilege to conduct systematic experimentation on children, acquired through methods that challenged every assumption about adoption, child welfare, and family structure in modern society. FBI Special Agent Michael Torres, who assumed control of the investigation in January 2004, discovered that Evelyn Morrow's activities were not the aberrant behavior of a disturbed individual, but the continuation of a family project that had been operating since the early 1900s under the guise of charitable work and social reform. The Morrow family papers, discovered in hidden archives throughout the mansion, revealed detailed documentation of what they called the generational harvest, a systematic program of acquiring children with specific characteristics and subjecting them to intensive conditioning designed to create what the family described as optimal human specimens for undefined future purposes. Dr. Sarah Chun, a federal psychologist brought in to analyze the extensive documentation, found evidence of psychological experimentation that spanned multiple generations and represented one of the most comprehensive unauthorized studies of human development in American history. The Morrow family had been conducting controlled experiments on child development for over a century, using their wealth to acquire subjects and their social position to avoid oversight. The historical records revealed that Cornelius Morrow, the family patriarch who had built Raven's Hollow Manor, had been influenced by early 20th century theories about eugenics and social engineering. He believed that conventional child rearing was inefficient and that superior humans could be created through systematic control of environmental factors during developmental years. Beginning in 1905, Cornelius had established a network of orphanages, charitable institutions, and social service organizations that provided him with access to children who could be removed from normal social development and subjected to intensive conditioning at the mansion. These children were selected based on specific criteria, including intelligence, physical characteristics, and family backgrounds that made their disappearance unlikely to trigger investigation. The basement facilities that investigators had discovered were only the most recent iteration of institutional infrastructure that had been continuously upgraded and modernized throughout the century. Each generation of Morrows had contributed to the sophistication of their conditioning methods, incorporating new understanding of psychology, medicine, and human development into their experimental protocols. The documentation revealed that hundreds of children had passed through the Morrow program over the decades, subjected to conditioning that was designed to enhance their intelligence while eliminating emotional characteristics that the family viewed as obstacles to optimal human development. The children were trained to suppress empathy, individual desire, and autonomous thinking in favor of rational analysis and obedience to authority. Agent Torres's investigation revealed that the Morrow family had been documenting their experiments through detailed psychological assessments, medical records, and behavioral analysis that treated the children as laboratory subjects rather than human beings deserving protection and care. The data they collected was used to refine their conditioning techniques and develop protocols that could be applied to future subjects. But perhaps most disturbing was the discovery that the Morrow experiments had been partially successful. Many of the children who had been subjected to their conditioning had grown up to achieve remarkable success in academic, professional, and leadership positions throughout American society. The enhanced individuals had become influential figures in government, business, science, and other fields where their systematic training in rational decision-making had provided significant advantages. However, these successes had come at enormous cost to the individuals involved. Follow-up studies conducted by the Morrows revealed that their enhanced subjects struggled with emotional relationships, suffered from high rates of depression and anxiety, and often experienced psychological breakdown when confronted with situations that required empathy or emotional intelligence. The investigation also uncovered evidence that the Morrow family had been working with researchers and wealthy individuals in other countries who shared their beliefs about the necessity of creating enhanced humans through controlled child development. Their operation was part of an international network of similar projects that had been operating throughout the 20th century, funded by families and organizations that viewed conventional human development as inadequate for addressing complex global challenges. Dr. Chun's analysis of Evelyn's 14 children revealed that they represented the most sophisticated iteration of the Morrow conditioning program, incorporating decades of refinement and technological advancement. The children displayed intellectual capabilities that exceeded normal human ranges, along with psychological characteristics that made them highly effective at analytical thinking and problem-solving tasks. But they also showed evidence of psychological damage that might be irreversible. They struggled with basic emotional expression, showed no capacity for independent decision-making, and appeared to have no sense of individual identity beyond their role in the Morrow program. They had been systematically trained to view themselves as components in a larger project rather than autonomous individuals with their own rights and interests. The investigation revealed that Evelyn's 32-year absence from the United States had been spent establishing similar facilities in other countries and coordinating with international partners who shared the Morrow family's vision of human enhancement through systematic child conditioning. She had been preparing for her return by developing advanced techniques and acquiring children from sources around the world. The 14 children had been collected from various countries over a period of years, acquired through a network of corrupt adoption agencies, human trafficking organizations, and charitable institutions that provided children to wealthy buyers who could pay premium prices for specific characteristics. Each child had been selected based on genetic, psychological, and intellectual criteria that the Morrows believed made them suitable for enhancement. Financial analysis revealed that Evelyn had spent over $20 million during her years of exile, funding the acquisition of children, the establishment of conditioning facilities, and the development of techniques that represented the culmination of a century of experimentation. Her return to Ravens Hollow Manor was intended to begin the final phase of the Morrow project, which aimed to produce a generation of enhanced individuals who would assume leadership positions in American society. The legal challenges were unprecedented. The children had been acquired through methods that violated numerous international laws regarding human trafficking and child welfare, but they had also been subjected to conditioning that had achieved remarkable enhancements in their intellectual and analytical capabilities. They were simultaneously victims of sophisticated abuse and products of systematic enhancement that had given them abilities far beyond normal human ranges. Federal authorities faced the complex task of providing care for children who had been systematically conditioned to reject normal human relationships and social development. Traditional foster care and adoption services were inadequate for addressing the needs of Individuals who had been trained to view emotional connection as weakness and individual autonomy as inefficiency. The children were ultimately placed in specialized residential facilities designed to provide intensive therapy while attempting to develop the emotional and social capabilities that had been systematically suppressed during their conditioning. Some showed progress in developing individual identity and emotional expression, while others remained psychologically committed to the Morrow Project and its goals. Evelyn Morrow was arrested and charged with multiple federal crimes including human trafficking, child abuse, and conspiracy to commit crimes against children. But she showed no remorse for her activities and continued to defend the Morrow Project as necessary for the advancement of human civilization. She argued that the children had received superior education and development that would allow them to make contributions to society that would justify whatever personal costs they had experienced. The case led to significant international cooperation in investigating and dismantling networks involved in the trafficking of children for experimental purposes. Multiple arrests were made in various countries, and several other facilities similar to Ravenshollow Manor were discovered and closed. But the fundamental questions raised by the Morrow case continue to influence debates about human enhancement, child welfare, and the ethics of systematic intervention in human development. The family had demonstrated that it was possible to create enhanced humans through environmental control, but they had also provided evidence of the enormous psychological costs involved in such projects. The 14 children who had been intended as the culmination of the Morrow Project remain living reminders that human enhancement might be technically possible, but ethically indefensible. Their superior intellectual capabilities are accompanied by profound emotional and social deficits that may never be fully addressed through therapeutic intervention. The macabre history of the Morrows revealed that the greatest threats to children might not come from obvious predators or abusers, but from systematic ideologies that view childhood as raw material for projects aimed at improving human capabilities without regard for individual welfare or autonomous development. Ravenshollow Manor was eventually demolished by court order, but the questions raised by the Morrow case continue to resonate in discussions about genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, and other technologies that might be used to enhance human capabilities. The family's century-long experiment serves as a warning that the pursuit of human improvement can become a form of profound evil when it treats individuals as means rather than ends, and when it sacrifices human dignity for abstract theories about optimal development. The children who survived the Morrow program continue to struggle with the legacy of their enhancement, serving as living evidence that some forms of improvement exact costs that make the achievement meaningless. Their story warns that the protection of children requires vigilance not only against obvious harm, but against those who would sacrifice individual humanity for visions of collective advancement that benefit no one except those with the power to implement them. Thank you for watching another tale unfold here on NW Storytime. Every story hides a secret, and tonight you uncovered another one. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us keep the secrets alive. Until next time, stay curious.